So Jay, great to have you and have this conversation. It's long overdue. How long have we been working together?
We met almost exactly 2 years ago when I flew out to Portland at your first product offsite as the CEO of Fabric.
That's right. But you were familiar. You were already a customer of Fabric, the brand, or not the brand, but our and you were actively deploying Fabric, and a great design customer. And then you actually got Fabric deployed at Chico's, and then you eventually decided to take a trip to the dark side and joined us as our chief customer officer. We worked together for quite some time. You really helped us navigate through a lot of different kind of customer scenarios and really emphasize on our customer first kind of philosophy. And now you're taking the next chapter and you decide to become an advisor to Fabric, but also advise a number of different companies, brands, retailers, as well as tech companies. Very exciting. Quite a change, Jay. And what are you doing? Like, tell everybody what you're doing next.
Yeah, I actually just launched Topper Consulting again. I had fired that up before I went to work for Chico's FAS. And in fact, I started that process consulting for Chico's, and it quickly turned into a full-time chief digital officer role. So I've refreshed that. And I miss retail. I did like my experience being on the dark side. And it's funny, even people on the dark side call it the dark side. And I gained an incredible amount of empathy, not just with Fabric, but with all the partners and serving customers versus being served in a B2B space, and the product management and engineering, which I've managed my whole career until Fabric, but it's very different in a company like Fabric. So I learned an incredible amount, but I really love the kind of the bold innovation combined with the daily grind of retail. It's just a place I'm super comfortable. So I hope to do some consulting and, maybe some fractional or who knows, full-time work for retail companies. I just kicked it off today after a 90-day sabbatical. We'll see how it goes.
Well, good for you. Everybody should take advantage of that. You're deep kind of a well of information, and your network's deep. Been very helpful. We continue to tap into your expertise. And so let's do a little sharing. I mean, you have longtime chief digital officer, decades of retail experience. If you were sitting, like, do the time machine, go back 3-4 years ago, how do you think your priorities 3-4 years ago as a chief digital officer are running a major set of e-com sites would differ from your priorities today?
Yeah, I think at its core, and you and I have talked about this for actually years since we met, at the core of retail, I had a merchant teach me a long time ago, traffic times conversion times AOV equals revenue. And at the end of the day, those are prime top line, metrics. And then you get into, gross margin, contribution margin, EBITDA, and cash. And those are still the fundamental pillars of pretty much every effort inside of an organization should in some way, shape, or form help those out. And I think what's changed, and it really changed, there's been waves of it. And there's been waves of, if I go back to the beginning of my retail career, IT, data, supply chain, some of these things were just throw it over the wall and they were in their own silos. And with the advent of the chief digital officer, those silos started to break, and there was a lot of pressure on the organizations to all become much more digitally savvy. And if I fast forward to now, and one of the things I'm most excited in the retail landscape, with a combination of the macro environment of retail right now is pretty tough, but throw into that the advent of AI, which I'm a believer in, I know you're a believer in, the acceleration of solutions and incremental improvements and ROI and efficiencies and demand generation. The need for speed and the need now for the entire organization to be more technically savvy or AI savvy in their respective functions is just at a height I have never seen before. Usually I'm bringing people along, sometimes kicking and screaming, and now it's, people are thirsty for it. And I think we're going to see a wave here over the next, 0 to 24 months that's going to be as big as anything we've ever seen.
You've lived through a few other kind of disruptions. I know I have as well. And maybe lessons learned. Like, I think a good example, at least in the world of retail, would be the move from, mobile to mobile, using mobile first versus, relying on desktop from a tech perspective. Can you maybe talk about like what you learned from that shift, or maybe other shifts to maybe how it can apply to AI?
I was really fortunate because I think one of the biggest shifts, and you've brought this up before, that, a brick and mortar world prior to 1996 or so, or 1995, everything was primarily a brick and mortar world. I was really fortunate. My second retail company was Rosetta Stone, and they had kiosks, but it was a technology company and a platform company and a software company, but the vast majority of its sales came through e-commerce. So I kind of cut my teeth in retail on e-commerce, but that was certainly a big change. And it's only now companies are starting to realize, it's starting to pass 50% on e-commerce versus stores. And sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but you have that dynamic. And then mobile took years, because I think every retail company in the planet can tell you what percent of their traffic and conversion and orders are mobile. And if I had to look backwards on mistakes that maybe everyone's made, certainly I could have done a lot better, is as traffic started to get past 50%, conversion lagged dramatically. And I don't think there was enough attention on the platform itself and the experience itself to enable the conversion to keep up with the traffic. Because in a lot of cases, it was a third of the conversion or half of the conversion. And they're just now starting to get into parity, which, if you think about it, is ridiculous, because mobile's been well over 50% of traffic for the vast majority of retailers for years and years. And so people were a little slow to respond to that, frankly. So, but those are two really big changes. The advent of e-commerce is only, is it 30 years? 95, 05. Yeah, 30 years old is e-commerce, basically. Yeah. And then mobile's probably 15, half of that. And now you've got AI, and I think that's going to be even faster than half of that. Like it's years, not a decade.
Well, if we know anything, every disruption, every tech cycle is exponentially faster than the previous one. And you've already kind of talked about the disruption of AI, which we've talked about as, it's the topic across every tech leader and probably every company on the planet. As you think through a lens and what you're advising companies and your own experience, how would you rank AI today as a channel compared to maybe other channels, whether it's Google search, direct, whatnot?
Well, I mean, each brand's going to be very different, just like percentage of e-commerce versus stores and percent of mobile, and your customer base defines a lot of that. Chico's FAS has a slightly older customer base, for example, and there's fashion brands out there that have, super young, customer bases, and their expectations are different. But I put it high. I don't think there's a function inside an organization, whether it's technology, customer service, supply chain, marketing, that doesn't have real solutions out there in AI that are going to change the fundamental outcomes of a company. And what's really changed is, I think, these days of having 10-year ROIs or 5-year ROIs and a 10-year, something you go spend millions of dollars on and throw it on your balance sheet and it sits there for 5 or 10 years, and you take a year or 2 years to launch it. I think that's gone. I mean, it's not 100% gone, but this concept of you need to come in. If I walk into a retailer tomorrow in any role as a C-level, I would have expectations that within 60 days something would be better, or 90 days then it would be better, and I would just incrementally get better and better. Because if you're not on that path where things are better to be able to combat some of those macro dynamics, then I think you're going to start falling behind pretty significantly. So, and there's a lot of tricks in AI out there. There's a lot of things that aren't really AI and maybe they don't work, but the bottom line is there's lots that do, and it's been out there for years. So I think that if you're not putting a lot of focus on that, to really understand how it can impact the trajectory of your business, you're making a mistake.
Jay, maybe just digging into that, we kind of see two avenues of AI, at least in our world. One, AI for optimization of your business. How you can use AI tooling to kind of take inefficiency out, do things differently. At the same time, AI is a channel. And if I strip those apart, how would you think about organizing prioritizations against the two?
I would be, I would be incredibly focused on the optimization side of the house, because that's there today, whether you're talking about the AI capabilities around order management, inventory placement, customer service. There's so many real solutions out there that can help solve some problems and speed things up. I think even in the merchandising side of the house and the marketing, helping you make decisions of where to invest your dollar, and being really smart about that, because that's been complex for forever, and it's just going to get more. I think on the demand generation side of these engines, I would be prepared, and like every other new channel that comes up, I'd be an early adopter and I'd test and learn, because for some companies that's going to be a big channel more quickly, and for other companies it's not. It's like TikTok, but obviously it's bigger than TikTok, but it's going to be a channel that you have to prepare for and test. Your product data has to change. You have to start figuring out the data is going to get more complex, especially if these engines start to actually interact with your cart and who owns all this information that's flowing. So there's a lot to think about. So I'd be focused on both, but I think real time, that optimization side is where I'd put the initial focus. Get some wins there quickly and test and learn your way into new marketing paradigms.
Well, I think that I like that. I mean, when you talk to your peers and across the industry, how are they approaching it?
I think exactly the way I have to admit that I have, canvassed some peers over the last month or so as I've positioned my own self into getting back into retail, and the realism of what's going on the back end, and shrinking your product life cycle, the calendar of bringing a product to market, shrinking the time it takes to get a product to a customer, and doing it in the most cheapest way possible while still meeting or exceeding their expectations. Customer service, of course, those are real right now, like they're tangible. And if you're doing 1 million orders and you can save 10 cents on each order, then that's $100,000. If you're doing 10 million orders, that's $1 million. It's very tangible right now, and it also improves an experience, which has customers come back and go through your funnel again. I think on the marketing side, it's probably a little bit slower, just because it's not quite there yet. The top of the funnel's there, the bottom's not. Advertising hasn't really permeated. I think that whole area is going to change dramatically in the next, I think, again, by 2027.
And on that front, if you think about take optimization in one bucket, and then getting your company ready for a new channel, like basically AI as a channel, AI search and whatnot, and any practical steps you would guide people to how to get ready for that?
Well, I think one of the big things is your product information. And people haven't even yet caught up now, take AI out of it, on getting their, you think of SEO and getting your product information ready for SEO, and then Facebook, and then TikTok, and then, all these different channels that people have now, Instagram. And it's only like 5-10 years ago that people had to really, social really took off like a rocket. And, as far as purchasing directly, not influence, but actually buying via these channels. So because this is going to go a lot faster, you don't want to wait until it's prime time. So a lot of it has to do with making your product information sort of, AEO ready for these engines. And there's not a lot of risk in that. And again, you can learn your way into it. I do think there's going to be some trust conversations to have, around the fact that if these engines, and they will start taking advertising dollars, what happens to their algorithms? And then the second way I'd prepare, which as this is something that's not changed as a career CIO, CTO, CDO, you got to have your data plan squared away. Where is your data? How are you storing it? How easily is it accessible? How accurate is it? How are you using it? That's going to become even more important. I mean, because you're adding this whole new thing on top of what's already exists, both on the optimization and the marketing side. And that data repository that you own and manage is going to be ever more critical and has to be super, super nimble.
That's a good term, nimble. Jay, now that you kind of think through that, what gets you most excited right now about all the different changes that are happening?
It's funny. I've managed marketing twice in my career, but I'm not a marketer. I lead with technology solutions for big, huge, hairy problems in business, and I really love that. But I think marketing is what we're just talking about here, not just this new channel, but I'm a lover of contribution margin. And if I'm a retailer and you're going to give me $500 more to spend on a channel, or 5 million or 500,000, whatever that number is, where do I spend that to get the best value, where not only am I going to make margin on that sale and the most margin, but it's also going to stimulate somebody to come back again and buy. And this concept of LTV and the size of your customer file, like I am so focused on that, because as I believe, as LTV and the size of your customer file goes, so goes your company, period. Those are the two highest level metrics, I think. So to me, I'll never not be jazzed about those two metrics. Because if the people that get that right, your LTV can go up and your customer file going down, and sometimes it can mask a problem that is going to show up a year later when your customer base has shrunk. So I guess that gets me jazzed. The one area that I'm going to flip, I got a couple of questions for you. I'm going to flip it and make you talk. And we didn't prep this, but on the software development side, when I think of the engineers that I've managed throughout my career, who've all been far smarter than I was, and the development organizations, and sometimes we've bought, oftentimes we've always built something, and all these integrations that you've got going on, and some of these products that are just unwieldy. How is software development changing with AI?
Well, the entire supply chain of how we develop is turned inside out. It's exponentially faster. It's really exciting. And there's kind of I call it shift left strategy here, which is, let's say engineering resources, they're always scarce, but they were super scarce. And you spent a lot of time kind of planning what you're going to build. Now with the accessibility tools, anybody with an idea can build a prototype in minutes. So it's now the art of the possible is really at your fingertips. And so that allows much more rapid kind of idea prototyping before you actually get to the actual development. And of course, with all the code assistant tools, Cursor, whatnot, your engineers can be much, much more productive in building the output, but they're really underlying is how you're using AI models to, do whole things you could never do before. I would go back to, you talked about getting your product data ready. Product data has always been kind of a challenge, right? How do you keep it up to date? You're getting data from your manufacturers, from your suppliers. It's inconsistent. It's not the same format. Maintaining that's expensive. And at the same time, it's one of your core IPs as a company. Well, with AI, suddenly we can apply a whole new level to that data in a way that just was economically not feasible before. But it's not just like, okay, I'll lift the data up and make it complete, but you can use AI in a different way, which is to examine signals from all your channels and make very specific, basically product attributes and descriptions and just overall your catalog to tailor to very unique experiences by channel.
And almost and almost like and change regularly, right? Like it's not change it and
and,
throw it out there and hope.
and near constantly. So this was something that just was not feasible before, and suddenly is now very accessible. And that can drive a sea change in your business. It can lift all boats, right? It not only helps me take advantage of a new emerging channel, but my existing kind of channels will also rise. So this is a case where you get twofer, right? You get to tap into growth, um, but also automation in something that just was not feasible before through the power of this tech. And that's exciting, right? And so it's just a completely different way of thinking about how you would potentially go to market with something.
Yeah, that then that feeds the whole marketing because that helps your demand, and that's always been top of mind when you ask me what gets me jazzed. The other question I have for you is, and we've had conversations about this, is one of the blogs I when I think of Fabric, we launched 2 years ago, right when you showed up at Fabric, we launched Chico's, and that started probably 18 months or so before. And this concept of replatform, and I was looking through my old blogs that I did when I was with Fabric, and since I've left Fabric, I've been able to do a few as well. But I saw this one that said, replatform, and there's this whole replatform series, and I was like, well, I'm not putting that on my website because that was something that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if somebody needed to replatform, I was gold because I know how to do it fast. I know how to pick the right products, get the people energized around it. And I've done, 100, lifts and shifts of some way, shape or form over my career. But now and Fabric was a platform, right? I mean, that's what you were fundamentally, but now you can layer these things over platforms and you don't necessarily have to rip out all the plumbing. Explain that to me a little bit, like how you've transitioned over the last 2 years to serve retail.
Well, I think to really understand that, you probably need to take a step back and look at, just like you made predictions around, what's happening and how, let's say, agentic is going to change the way people shop. It's also happening to enterprise software, which is the traditional CRUD, right? The kind of rules-based systems built around workflow and fairly hard-coded rules. Those systems are fine, but they locked you into a very specific process. They tried to kind of normalize a process, and you had to adhere to that process. Well, AI changes that game completely. Instead, now AI can then adapt to make software adapt to your process. And no longer are you kind of locked into a very rigid set of workflow and specific rules. And these database driven systems will quickly become just stores of data. And there's a new level of kind of what we call system of intelligence and actions that ride on top of it. And so a lot of your existing systems will fold to the background and really become repositories of information. And what will emerge is a series of process workflows on top of that to take action with intelligence using your existing historical data and new signals that you bring into the market. And it's going to drive a sea change of ROI and impact on the business. So right now, you see few replatforms because we're in a fundamental shift. I would equate it, it's even more dramatic from going, let's say, from client server to cloud. This is going to be moving from a CRUD-based old rules, workflow systems to system of action, system of intelligence, where agents will handle discrete functions, interact with your data, and will really drive a whole nother level of outcomes. So it's really exciting. This is what Fabric has embarked on. This is we've been developing agents for specific commerce tasks where we can see really good optimization. A big one is around product data. Another one's around supply chain data. And you don't have to re-platform to reap the benefits of this. You might need to upgrade here and there because your existing systems can't handle the data requests and the data, all the different requests and demands. But these systems will quickly shift to the background. and there'll be a whole new level of output is right on the horizon. Is beyond exciting. It's a rethink.
And the other thing that, as you were talking, and I agree. I agree with you. I still think there's value in if you happen to be fortunate enough to have some simplicity on that back end where you can make your data super accessible and protect it the way you need. Because some of these big nasty systems, I still have nightmares about sometimes. But the end user changes too, right? Like if you go back years, like if you wanted something done with your system or you wanted information from your system, in a lot of cases, you'd have to ask technology or some kind of technology super user within your function. But this all puts the power into the end users themselves, correct? Like the AI changes also how to access this and change it and ask it questions and everything else.
If you think about changing order fulfillment rules, Jay, like in your old world, I'm guessing you would probably have a spreadsheet or a document. Here's my rules, right? And if X happens, Y happens. And then, maybe you're lucky enough to have a pretty complex user experience where you checked a bunch of boxes and worked your workflow, or more likely you wrote it down, you argued over it, and then you gave it to your programmers to implement. And then you spent a couple months or weeks back testing it. That's probably pretty close, right?
That's pretty close.
Yeah. Okay. So new world is you would, as an operator, you would model what you want through AI, just like you would, your current experience, let's say with ChatGPT or Perplexity. You're interacting with it. It's coming back with rule suggestions. Once you see those suggestions, you debate those, and you go back and forth with your team. You then can run back tests on those against historical data and data coming in. You don't have to implement anything. You just run testing scenarios against simulation. If it works, you like it, then you tell AI to implement it and just go update the rules for you. So if you think about that change right there, you probably collapse something that took you weeks, maybe a month, to maybe days.
Or within the same day in some cases.
Yeah, and it gave visibility to the people who actually have to make those business decisions and need an outcome. And it freed up a lot of technical resource to work on projects outside of maintaining, fixed hard-coded rules that nobody wanted to touch. So that's a simple example, but man, right? Talk about just a order of magnitude change in simplicity, visibility, and business impact. And really squeezes out a ton of cost and inefficiency in the company.
Yeah, and I think the other, and that's one of the things I said about raising the savviness of the end users. I think the people that are technophiles, that are technophiles that want to interact with these systems and want to learn that, versus there's people that avoid those. I think the more you get comfortable with that type of interaction as a traditional end user that may not have had to have done that. The other component that popped into my mind when you were talking, so you have development that has gotten simpler and better and more efficient, and you've got the end user experience to create change in hours or days instead of months. But you also have the information coming back to you, right, that presents what's going on a lot faster. When I can't tell you how many times just getting reporting where everyone can agree on what's happening in the business. And now you have a little bit more simplicity that comes into play there too, right?
Unfortunately, after decades of developing enterprise software, you always have to develop reports. So you'll develop this report, that report, and without fail, no matter how many reports you developed, they never exactly matched what your customers needed, because every business was somewhat unique. So then you fell back into building kind of report building, and then it was BI and so forth, and then it was special skills. That was just that's the way it was. And that goes away when you simply are asking questions back and forth and using a very specific AI model around your business to help guide you against the decisions of both not just historical data, but data coming in, real-time data. Complete, again, sea change. You're giving the power to the operators to run their business versus running that on a spreadsheet and relying on some out-of-date reporting. So fundamental sea change. Jay.
Fabric's always been that way, Mike. I remember, I mean, you've had that mentality of power to the end user, because even in the old world, when we put your product catalog into Chico's, everybody, all the e-commerce people that were using that said they went from the worst systems they've ever been involved with to the best and fastest. And that wasn't even using AI, but it was putting power into the end user. If you
a
had
little bit like a sports car, Jay.
What's that?
A little bit like a sports car.
Yeah, no, it's powerful. And that product catalog gets back to your product descriptions and feeding the demand channel and that. If you're, what do you at Fabric? If you look out, you ask me, what am I most excited about? And I'll flip that question back to you. And 5 years ago or 3 years ago, I might have said, hey, what are you most excited about in 2026? But because the world's getting shrinking, the timelines are shrinking. What are you most excited about in the next 3 or 4 months at Fabric? Why should retailers be excited about Fabric?
Well, I would say maybe even take a step back. I feel like we are at a cusp of a sea change where the technology, particularly AI technology, has matured very quickly, and the impact that it can have on your business is going to be profound. And I equate it all the way back to my days when I was at Netscape and we were building the first server-side e-com systems, right? This is a new channel, and thinking through like, wow, a whole new kind of way of buying and selling is emerging here and creating a digital channel. This is at that equivalent. So what I'm most excited about is we've been working very hard on that future, the future of commerce, and it's really fun. So we are just delighted to be working with early adopters and seeing that. And I know this year is maybe early in some aspects, but the technology adoption curve is exponentially faster right now than it was in all the other ones. This is the history of tech. It's going to happen even faster than we looked at. You brought it up. If you look at the CapEx investments by tech companies, they dwarf a lot of countries' GDPs. That's the amount of investment that's going into this. So you're seeing change that's just like a rocket ship. And that's exciting. It's exciting for our team. It's exciting for the industry. And, I think the way we are buying and selling is going to go through a fundamental change. It's more fun than ever to be the tip of the spear and help and drive and shape that.
I appreciate that. I'm very excited for Fabric. I obviously stay close with you guys and follow you and still get to write a little bit of content here or there. And I think,
well, Jay, you're an advisor. You call me up and advise me periodically.
Well, that's kind of what we're doing here, taking that for a ride. But I'm just so excited for Fabric, and I'm excited for retail in general. This is why I love retail, because you have to manage all of this inside of an ecosystem, that's again focused on what every company is focused on, revenue, EBITDA and cash, and how do you fit these pieces together? And I think Fabric's doing a wonderful job, making those pieces come together to fit what retail needs now and is certainly going to need in the future. So super cool.
Awesome. Well, very good. Well, Jay, thank you for the time today. Congrats on the next chapter of your storied career, and enjoy the last couple of weeks of summer.
I appreciate it, Mike. Thank you very much.